walkthrough of Swamp Pond Road, which I think everyone has sort of touched in a different way, but
Mhm.
maybe doesn't have a lot of a sense of the origin of this project. Like, why is it that shape? Why is it sort of a deviation from some of the other things that we do? And that comes across really clearly in some of the early modification and visualization meetings. So this is a client that kind of came to us with two things already. Came with both a site near Narrowsburg and came with a very specific sketch based on our big bar, where the site he had started to do some work on it already or started to make sense of this raw parcel, and we can review that. But then also, when coming to us, just as an inbound lead, said, your process looks great. I also have this sketch that I've been cooking up on graph paper. Is this feasible? And as we look through it, it was actually a pretty reasonable interpretation of how to make sense of some of our standard components. But some of the big shifts were in roofline, width, and other things that have structural implications. And we'll go through how some of we addressed uh, the client sketches and then interpreted them into something that is a little bit closer to what Huts does, and I think just generally a better layout overall. So here it is on Swamp Pond Road. We did a land evaluation early on, getting a sense of what the existing conditions were. This project is in Narrowsburg, or a little south of Narrowsburg in the Delaware River Valley. You can see the rest of the Huts projects in the area. There's already a driveway roughed out to get into the site and a lot of clearing on the parcel. Um, I would say if we had met this project earlier, we would have been quite a bit more selective with where the clearing happened, but he had engaged an excavator to basically clear a half acre and kind of make it a blank slate. Some other things already in place, power, really quiet road. Anyone who's been here knows that the worst time to try to find directions to this site is when you're closest to it because there is zero service at all, which I think for this client is a real benefit. For us, when we're doing site visits, makes it a little tough. Nice driveway though, nice entrance into the parcel. Kind of come up a hill to reveal where the house site is going to be, and then the house is in kind of the highest point in this cleared area, pointed out towards the tree line. Very sandy conditions, which we had to think about on the foundation type and other structural ideas, just because the pretty particular soil bearing conditions here. Okay, so one of the first modification visualization meetings we had, we took the client's sketches and sort of reflected it back to him directly. And the way that he sort of had it set up was like this, where there'd be kind of two volumes, a wider living, kitchen, dining, and master bedroom space, an entry, and then a smaller guest bedroom side, um, which you can see the origins of a big bar in this and some of the ideas of how to resolve the space in a way that felt a little bit more specific to his use. But a lot of the early ideas survived, that there would be kind of a low end of the site on the way that you approach, a glacier sort of deck facing side, that there would be a pool there. But we kind of took these sketches directly, reflected them back to uh, the client, and then started to analyze them from there. The other thing that we see is the shed roof making its way in right away. Quick section. And so we kind of modeled and produced a 3D Revit model of the exact sketches that we received. And there are a few things that we started to identify, right? The idea of creating privacy on the entry side of the house was there, but it also made this place feel like a bunker. The resolution of the material palette and what was going to be sort of foundation, what was going to be above foundation. It's not here because it's a white massing model, but even here, this thing's looking like pretty brutal, like a dugout. And we wanted to make sure it felt a lot less commercial and more like a welcoming home, even if it wanted this sort of entry side. But there are some moments that we wanted to make sure we called out as quite good, like this idea of an entry sequence that right when you come in, you see through the house, you see to the pool, you see to the woods. And so the first kind of experience of entering the house feels like kind of a vignette of what the house is all about, that there's sort of a closed off side, an open side, and then it leads into the outdoors. So you have like some funky window patterning here, kind of early inklings of ideas like, wouldn't it be cool if there's corner windows? Wouldn't it be cool if the private side of the house was glassier? And I'm sort of reflecting that stuff back directly without much resolution on what the actual design would be, but diagrammatically getting it across that one side is kind of closed and hidden and bunker-like, and the other side is really open and airy and kind of has a broad view of the forest. So sort of the general shape, and I think the first pass on the private side of the house gets a little, it's the resolution gets a little bit better, feels a little bit more like a feasible house. And like always, we started to put estimates to the project right away, and utilizing our standards figures as an example, start to put real numbers to what this thing would cost to see if we need to scale it up or scale it down, and not only reflect the design that the client had in mind back to him, but also the pricing and the implication of the cost of that design that he had back to him. And so that helped us make this next move, which I think was a really important one, to say like, all right, cool, this is what you had and what we reviewed. After seeing that first plan, the client was like, yes, we did it. We're done. Let's keep going. My sense was a little different, that we weren't quite done and we needed to put a little bit more effort into this thing. So we sort of took a moment, and I think that this is an important part of what we do, certainly on the development side, where we're creating guardrails to say this is too expensive or the cost of this idea is too much, but also on the design side to say, hey, great ideas, but like, here's a way to make that very good and very successful and unify some of the vision of what you have in mind. Um, so we kind of called out some highlights, that the public-private plan worked out really well. The shed roof was sort of compelling in creating a private side and a public side. Some of these corner glass conditions were really cool, but having no frame between them was going to create problems with having no structural posts. It was going to create sort of like, the client wants sort of like a glass on glass detail, which I think never ages well, particularly in places where there's a lot of pollen. You just always see that edge condition. So how do we get the feeling of that, but make it a little bit more architecturally successful? Okay. So again, looking at some of these moments and saying, all right, cool. Rather than having these open glass ideas, let's kind of start to bring posts in. Let's minimize the number of window types we're utilizing, so we don't have kind of window acne all over. We're getting into a more unified palette of window formats. Let's start to think about bringing in an overhang for shaded areas on the building. But looking at it, we kind of came to this conclusion: hey, we like this, but we should push and refine it further. That the we're kind of cutting off a lot of the view opportunities that you have, that we need greater consistency in the window types, and that's also going to help in reducing costs, so you have less diversity of window types. Create sort of better lines of sight within the house. If you look in this view, you come in, look to the left, and it's sort of a dead end, or they're kind of like all these dead end moments in the view corridors in the house, and it seemed like we could clean that up. And also the approach to massing is just like brutal coming up to it, that you arrive, you're just facing this siding wall, very harsh looking building. Again, feels more like industrial. Doesn't feel like a home. And these are all things we're kind of calling out within. The window composition is a little wacky. The corridor view looking down past the living kitchen dining, it just kind of looks at a dead end. Again, some like dead end moments here. And so we started to look at some precedents and said, all of the things that are in the spirit of what you had in mind can be really cool. Like shed roofs can be really cool. This idea of a more bunkery side with a linear window and a more open side, that can be really cool. The material differences between the foundation, the space above, that can all be really cool. But we need to spend a little bit of time resolving it. That our first take of reflecting back your sketch probably wasn't it, but we can retain a lot of the DNA of that design study and then improve on it. And so again, started to pull really great precedents of houses that kind of like express the way that they work, that the shed roof and the structure are all sort of revealed so that, like in this bottom right example, you wouldn't have to be a structural engineer to know exactly how this works. Those posts hold up, you have a long member that goes across, and then the shed roof members come across from one beam to the other. And so those seemed like good opportunities for us to bring in to this project and express a little bit more of the roof overhangs. That this long and low idea could also be really cool. That the approach feels really low, tight to the ground, and then on the opposite side, the house opens up, gets glassy, and really opens up to the view. And one of the big things that we introduced was rather than having siding come straight to the ground, let's have a material shift where we show some of the foundation and then we show the siding above. So the house doesn't feel so tall. It actually feels really low to the ground, even though we're playing with that slope to be able to get a deck with a pool in front sunk into it. So we needed to use the slope, but we didn't need to have one 25-foot tall wall of kind of monolithic material coming all the way down in the way that the first pass had that feeling. So material shifts. And I think that this is generally a take that we have in the design approach. Like, hey, you're coming to this after thinking about it. There's really great ideas here. We're not tossing them away. Our purpose and our reason for existing is to take in those ideas, think about them as interesting ingredients, and then figure out how to come up with a better way to combine them that is a better design output, a better space output, and a little bit more thoughtful on cost as well. So some of the things that we looked at were how to take advantage of this roof overhang to create outdoor spaces like this deck that you see here. This was on the left, the original facade on the left side. And then here are two studies on the right that once we overhang the roof, we get a protected outdoor area with a deck going around. That becomes a more private, intimate outdoor space for the master bedroom that is separated from the rest of the outdoor area, and sort of two studies for how that can work. And a couple of plan differences here. And you can see we're already starting to break up the material palette, create a concrete sort of plinth that the house sits on top of. So it's breaking up the scale a little bit. It's a little bit more elegant when you have these kind of ribbons of material going across rather than this big chunky airplane hanger sensation. And again, two ideas here on plan where now we're saying, hey, you don't need a whatever it was, 26-foot wide primary bedroom. Let's get smaller again on this one. That's not only going to open up the outdoor space, which is what's important for this property for you, but it's also going to reduce the amount of square footage and it's going to reduce the cost, which was a major driver for the client. And so we got into a plan where the diagram shifts. So rather than it being kind of like primary suite and living kitchen dining, instead a simpler diagram where it's private, public, private with these kind of cut-ins breaks down the mass a little bit so it's not like this giant monolithic thing, and starts to have the building feel like and read like three structures that are combined. So a very different feeling of approach where you can see that there's a space down below, but we're kind of lifting the house a little bit through the material difference. Still including these ribbon windows, but being a little bit more thoughtful around the placement and sizing of them. and opening up outdoor spaces that take advantage of the shed roof rather than it just being like a formal idea. It actually becomes a pragmatic choice that the shed roof is giving us these protected outdoor spaces. And again, a different read where you can really see the rhythm of the house. Left side, primary suite, center, living, kitchen, dining, right side, guest suite. And already starting to show some better material concepts that instead of running the flooring all the long way, let's run it the other way and then match it with flooring or ceiling material to kind of create this sort of like sandwich feeling that all the program lives between like um, these two surfaces, and also kind of drives the eye out and towards the windows. And again, we've sort of resolve some of the glass detailing, that it's simpler, a simpler palette of glass sizes, but always with the idea that we have a standard window or door size and then a standard transom height. So we don't get all kinds of crazy shapes here. We have a very unified and coherent window patterning approach. Same kind of corner detail here on the primary suite. And starting to create some material shifts, that this is a box, then there's sort of a light wood space in between in this sort of like liminal area that connects one space to the other, and then the next thing is another box. And I'll skip this one because this was a little bit like of an in-between option, and truthfully a little bit of a red herring to say, yeah, here's another way we're doing this, but it's not as good. We should really stick with the first option we laid out, and for the most part, that is where the project landed in the end. Um, and what was quite convincing here as well is that we were able to show that not only was it a better space with better lines of sight, better outdoor space, but that the sum cost was going to be less as well. That's kind of the ideal, that we come back with something that retains the vision of the client, that we've modified the house holding on to that intent but making it a better overall layout, and that the sum result is that the build cost is going to be less. That's kind of ideal. Cool. And then with in all of our subsequent presentations, to make sure that the design sort of stuck and we wouldn't waffle off it in every case, we kind of started with that again, kind of saying, hey, remember how good this layout really is and how it hits all these marks. And then started to play a little bit with material formats, getting a little bit more textured in how the material might lay out. And so that kind of got us through what we call our modifications and visualizations and a lot of the interior selections and getting a mood for the house. This presentation was from September or so. Let's see, finished modifications around September, October, worked on permit materials through November, December, January or so. And I would say had financing lined up in mid to tail end of the winter. Contractor was on board, broke ground around April. And then let's look at our 3 recent site visits, one in June, one in July, and one in August. In June, you can see we have foundations in. 4 weeks later, we have floor framing and walls starting to go up. Deck piers ready to go. But early bits of going up and going vertical, but you can already see in the foundation the shape of those 3 volumes reflected on site. And then most recently, in 4 weeks after that, or 3 weeks after that, the form of the house. Shed roofs in view, window patterning in view, very clear how the 3 kind of spaces work. The deck will be off of the front of here, along with the pool that we're able to get through approvals. but real fidelity between that early design and what we're seeing here.
I think another thing to note about this one too, Wayne, is that this is a project where the owner has retained us for like owner's rep services during construction. So he and his wife live in the city. Obviously, this is upstate in Narrowsburg. Um, Working with a really great contractor who's local to the area, but it's kind of just like two guys on a truck, so they don't have a lot of like back of house infrastructure or admin infrastructure. So we're really helping to fill a lot of those gaps during construction of how to communicate, between the client and the contractor, work through any questions the contractor is having sort of in real time, of which there were a few on this project where like some trusses came back at a different dimension than we originally thought they were because of how the engineer designed them. So we had to make some framing changes sort of live during construction. So it was really, really advantageous for us to be involved during this because we were able to help keep the project schedule moving, not running any cost overruns because we're framing and unframing and rebuilding things again, but really helping to smooth out that construction process on behalf of the client who's kind of managing a remote construction site on a custom house. So that's been going really, really successfully so far.
Yeah, so this is, I think this is also a good example of a house that would appear to be extremely custom because of the form, but a lot of while the roof is kind of a custom approach, the window patterning is a custom approach. A lot of our uh, wall assemblies, a lot of our material specifications, a lot of our mechanical approaches, a lot of those things feel very right at home from the standard. So there's certainly a lot of efficiencies that we're able to find, even though this deviates quite a bit from what you see on the site and doesn't look exactly like a medium bar or a big bar or any of those things. But it is cool to see like the client grabbed a big bar from our site, drew it on graph paper at home, started to push and pull it a little bit himself, and then asked us how much of this kind of applies. And we were able to say a lot of it applies. There's going to be some deviation and there's going to be some figuring out that we're doing, but the project costs and the both on the services side and on the construction side is sort of in line with any other project, even though the sum result deviates quite a lot from what you might think a HUT standard project would be.
Um, Again, another unique aspect of this project is that the owner is actually acting as their own general contractor on here. So, like the main framer, the main like contractor we're working with on the site has a relationship with a lot of subcontractors. That's all hired directly by the owner. So it's a little bit different than like some other situations again where you might have a larger general contracting firm that has all of their subs. All those subs are signing contracts with the main general contractor who's signing one contract with the client. This client has a dozen contracts with multiple subs that has sort of been managed throughout the entire process. So there's a lot of work we did sort of during the design and the pricing stages and continuing now into construction where we're sort of reviewing all the subcontractor contracts, validating that they're pricing the correct things, nothing is missing from those bids, that everyone's sort of on the same page of what's going into this project and what needs to happen. Kind of again filling some of those holes at a more you can say like traditional or larger general contracting company would be doing. We're really helping the client sort of in those roles as well to enable them to act as their own general contractor, which really helps reduce the end price
Sure.
for the project quite significantly, like maybe 15% less than they
Yeah.
might be spending if they had hired or more that they might have hired like their general contractor. So
Yeah. It's
so
good.
we're able to fill and really enable them to be successful on this.
And what's coming up next in the construction schedule for this? It seems like we've got
Yeah, well, windows are installed right now, which is pretty cool. The roof should be going on within a couple of weeks. We've been coordinating getting power run to the site so all the subcontractors can come in, like electrical, mechanical, plumbing. They'll be starting up in the next few weeks as well, really starting on the interior fit out. Deck is being built. There's a pool that's been delivered to site already that'll be installed at some point. So really just moving full speed ahead.